Emotional Intelligence, Daniel Goleman. In a world racing forward with the pace of technology and knowledge, where success is often measured by test scores or IQ levels, Daniel Goleman poses a fundamental question. Is IQ alone enough? The answer Goleman clearly proposes is no. Through this book, Goleman reveals that there is another kind of intelligence, one that may have a greater impact on our personal and professional lives, and even on our most critical decisions. It is what he calls emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is not measured in schools, nor does it show up in conventional aptitude tests. It is the ability to understand our emotions and control them, to empathize with others, and to successfully manage human relationships. The journey of the book. Goleman relies on neuropsychology and brain research to prove that emotions are not just fleeting reactions, but hidden forces that drive human behavior and shape one's path in life. And these forces, if not well understood and managed, can be the reason behind the destruction of career paths, human relationships, or life-changing decisions. So why is this book important? Because we often see academically brilliant people who fail at communication, leadership, or even building a stable family. On the other hand, we find others who may not hold the highest degrees, but possess a strong presence, wisdom in dealing with others, and an ability to influence. And this is where the secret lies: emotional intelligence. Where does the book begin? Goleman starts with the gap between what we know about intelligence and what we actually experience in our lives. Why do educated people behave in emotionally immature ways? Why do emotions sometimes control decisions? And why don't schools teach us how to understand ourselves and regulate our feelings? Goleman's goal: not only to explain emotional intelligence, but to call for an educational revolution, one that gives emotions the same level of attention as mathematics and science.
Part 1. The Brain and Emotion. Why might emotional intelligence mean more than IQ? At the outset, Daniel Goleman presents an idea that might seem shocking to many: that the ability to excel in life is not necessarily linked to one's IQ. We have grown used to being measured by grades, scores, and tests, as if our whole life can be summed up in a number. What is your IQ? But Goleman says that's not everything. How does our brain work when dealing with emotion? To understand emotional intelligence, we must first shed light on the anatomy of the emotional brain. The brain is not just a cold calculating machine. It is a complex battleground between the emotional mind and the rational mind. At the center of the brain lies a part called the amygdala, which acts like an immediate emotional alarm system. When we feel danger, or anger, or joy, the amygdala sends a signal before the conscious brain even reacts. And here lies the dangerous secret. Emotion can precede thought. This is what sometimes makes us act in ways we later regret, because our feelings got ahead of our reasoning. The moment of emotional hijacking. Goleman calls these moments emotional hijacking, when the amygdala takes over the decision-making process and bypasses the cerebral cortex, the part responsible for logic and thinking. An example? A man collapses in rage over a trivial situation at work, or a child loses control at school, or even a leader makes a catastrophic decision under sudden emotional pressure. These moments aren't just random incidents. They are direct results of a lack of emotional intelligence. So what exactly is emotional intelligence? It is the ability to understand your emotions
and their causes. Control them before they control you. Empathize with others' feelings, and react in a mature and professional way in moments of stress. These skills, as Goleman explains, can be more important than IQ. What good is genius if you can't control your anger, or understand someone else's pain, or master your impulses? Shocking studies. Goleman points to multiple studies showing that many people with high IQs failed in their professional or emotional lives, while many others with average IQs succeeded because they possessed another kind of intelligence, emotional intelligence. The core message of this part: don't let a number define you. True intelligence is not only in solving equations, but in understanding yourself, managing your emotions, and building balanced relationships with others.
Chapter 2. The Anatomy of Emotion. What happens inside the brain when we feel? In this chapter, Daniel Goleman takes us on a journey inside the human mind to deconstruct the neural structure of emotion, how it arises, how it is transmitted, and why it is sometimes difficult to control. It all starts with the amygdala. Imagine a small center inside your brain, no bigger than an almond, yet possessing enormous authority. This part is called the amygdala, and it is the center responsible for analyzing emotional stimuli, especially those related to danger or threat. The amygdala functions like an early warning system. It observes the scene and analyzes any signal that may indicate a threat even before the message reaches the thinking brain. And here, the amygdala intervenes, sending commands to the body. The heartbeat accelerates, breathing changes, muscles tense up. All of this happens before you say to yourself, "I'm afraid." Then comes the role of the thinking brain. After the amygdala reacts, it's the turn of the prefrontal cortex, the most developed part of the brain, which is responsible for analysis, decision-making, and logical thinking. But sometimes the amygdala has already preceded you and made the emotional decision on your behalf. This is when what Goleman calls emotional disconnection from the mind occurs, meaning that emotion escapes the control of conscious thought. The results of this anatomy are: emotion is a primitive, innate part of our brain, developed to protect us, but sometimes it works against us. The amygdala dominates when emotions are strong, especially in situations of fear, anger, trauma, or intense love. Emotional control does not come from suppressing emotion, but from being aware of it and training the thinking brain to intervene before it's too late. Emotional intelligence starts here. If you want to be emotionally intelligent, understand this sequence: signal, emotional response, rational intervention. The shorter the distance between emotion and thought, the closer you are to control and maturity. The message of this chapter is: emotion is not weakness. It is a natural alarm system. But true strength lies in possessing the key to balance between heart and mind.
Chapter 3. When emotions take control. What happens when our feelings lead us? In this chapter, Goleman deepens his discussion about the hidden danger when emotions escape control. And he begins with the big question: what happens when we don't manage our emotions, but they manage us? The answer? We lose control over our actions, sabotage our relationships, and weaken our ability to make rational decisions. Emotional hijacking, the sudden explosion. Goleman describes situations people go through daily. Someone suddenly gets angry and yells at a colleague. A father hits his child without having planned to. A teenager gets into a fight and completely loses his temper. These are not just moments of weakness, but what is scientifically called emotional hijacking. In this moment, the amygdala takes control of the nervous system and freezes the role of the rational mind. It's as if your heart took the wheel from your mind without your permission. The amygdala declares a state of emergency. When the amygdala receives a signal of threat or stress, it behaves as if you're in mortal danger, even if the situation is minor. It launches a series of reactions. Adrenaline surges. The heart beats strongly. Muscles prepare for action. Thinking narrows. This ancient mechanism was useful for early humans to escape predators, but now it makes us act impulsively in everyday situations that do not require this emotional violence. Examples from real life? An employee loses his job because he lost his temper in a meeting. A relationship ends because of an argument that began with a passing remark. A student hits a classmate because of a silly comment. What do these stories have in common? They are all moments of lost emotional intelligence because emotion took the lead. Can this hijacking be prevented? Yes, but not through force, rather through understanding. Self-awareness is the key. The more you recognize that you're about to get emotional, the more you give your mind a chance to step in before things escalate. Goleman points out that emotional intelligence is not the suppression of emotions, but the art of dealing with them consciously and maturely. A simple exercise. Every time you feel anger, fear, or frustration, take a deep breath. Notice your feelings without judging them. Ask yourself, what am I feeling, and why? Decide whether you will respond now, or wait a bit until you calm down. The message of this chapter: we are not doomed to be slaves through our emotions. True strength lies in feeling and then choosing how to respond.
Chapter 4. Nature prepares us for emotional learning. Were we born ready to understand emotions? In this chapter, Goleman presents a surprising idea: that our brains are biologically primed from birth to learn emotions, but this doesn't happen automatically. It requires guidance, meaning emotional intelligence is not just a social skill we learn later in life, but an extension of biological foundations planted in us from the very first moments of life. Early experiences shape us. When a child is born, their brain is not fully developed, and their first relationships with mother, father, and surroundings shape the map of their emotional responses. Goleman explains that the way you are treated in childhood lays the foundation for your future patterns in understanding your emotions, expressing them, and responding to the emotions of others. Example: a child raised in an environment of understanding and care learns to handle anger and sadness in a healthy way. A child in a harsh or neglectful environment may grow up repressing emotions or exploding with them. The open neural windows period. There are critical periods in childhood that scientists call developmental windows. During these phases, the brain is extremely sensitive to emotional experiences. A child learns empathy from a loving glance, or loses trust from a harsh shout, or becomes anxious because they lived in a space filled with yelling or threats. These experiences are stored as neural patterns inside the brain and become the reference point a person returns to in future life situations. Emotion can be taught. Here, Goleman offers a revolutionary idea: that emotional intelligence can be developed through education and practice, just like reading or math.
We aren't born knowing how to calm ourselves or express ourselves or understand others, but we have the capacity to learn if it is taught the right way. And this opens the door to the roles of family, school, and society in building this type of intelligence. What if we taught kids how to feel? Goleman poses a practical and important question. Why aren't emotions taught in schools the way we teach science or languages? Teaching a child to name their emotions, to say, "I'm angry" or "I'm afraid," is the first step to dealing with themselves and others with intelligence and calm. The message of this chapter: we have the biological seeds of emotional intelligence, but their growth needs the right soil, warm care, and conscious teaching. And if we fail to provide that, we create generations who are smart with numbers, but lost in feelings.
Chapter 5. Knowing oneself, the first foundation of emotional intelligence. How do you look into your depths? In this chapter, Goleman starts with a simple but fundamental idea. You can't manage what you don't know. That is, you can't control your emotions, understand your behaviors, or change your reactions unless you are first aware of yourself. This skill is called self-awareness, and it is the cornerstone of everything that follows in emotional intelligence. What is self-awareness really? It's not just knowing that you are angry or sad. It is knowing what triggers your emotions. How do they affect you? What patterns do you keep repeating? Are you the one guiding your emotions, or are they guiding you? Self-awareness is the ability to catch the moment before it catches you, to see the emotional wave approaching and prepare for it, instead of being drowned by it without warning. The brain observes itself. In this chapter, Goleman explains that the human brain contains centers for self-observation, which help us be witnesses to ourselves, to notice our emotions without being completely swept up in them. This ability isn't equally strong in everyone. Some people live under the weight of their emotions without awareness, while others have an inner eye that watches, analyzes, and chooses. Real-life examples. An employee feels frustrated but doesn't know why, so he takes it out on colleagues without realizing the root problem. A young woman realizes she's feeling jealous, so she takes steps to deal with her emotions before they affect her behavior. A young man keeps repeating the same emotional mistake without asking himself, why? The difference here isn't in IQ, but in self-knowledge. Why is this skill important in life? Because the one who understands themselves can control themselves. The one who knows their hidden motives can't be deceived by them. And the one who sees their emotions clearly is better able to understand others' emotions. Goleman says, self-awareness doesn't mean total control, but understanding the inner self honestly, without justification or denial. How to develop this skill, Goleman points out. Meditation and self-observation, emotional journaling, asking yourself questions. What am I feeling? Why? Is this an old emotion or related to the present moment? Self-review after every emotional moment. How did I act? Could I have responded better? The message of this chapter is knowing oneself is not a luxury. It's a necessity. It is the compass that guides your behavior in a complex world full of triggers and emotional pressures. Chapter 6. Self-Regulation. How to manage your emotions. From feeling to action. After understanding in the previous chapter the importance of knowing oneself, we now move on to the greater challenge. What do you do after you know you're angry? Do you explode, or do you hold yourself back? Do you let sadness paralyze you, or do you move despite its weight? Here is where true emotional intelligence is born. not in just feeling, but in managing the response. How does emotion work in the body? Goleman explains that every strong emotion triggers physical reactions. Anger raises blood pressure. Sadness slows movement. Fear charges the muscles for escape. Anxiety scatters concentration. If we don't consciously intervene, this emotional energy turns into automatic actions, often harmful. But a person with emotional intelligence can separate feeling from action. They can say, "Yes, I'm angry, but I won't shout, I won't hurt, I won't regret." Un-22, Un-22 to Un-25, Un-22. Control doesn't mean suppression. An important point Goleman emphasizes. Controlling emotion doesn't mean suppressing it or denying it. It means managing it wisely. Giving yourself a moment before reacting, expressing what you feel in an appropriate way, choosing the right time, place, and behavior for release. Like someone controlling a car on a difficult mountain road, they don't shut off the engine, but balance speed and brakes with precision. Techniques for emotion management. Goleman presents some methods proven effective in calming emotions. Deep breathing slows the nervous rhythm, calms the body. Cognitive reappraisal. Instead of saying, "He insulted me," say, "Maybe he had a bad day." Mindful meditation strengthens the gap between emotion and reaction. Positive self-talk. "I can handle this," and "This isn't worth ruining my mood over." Exercise or movement releases emotional tension in a healthy way. What happens when you lose control? Destructive reactions, poor decisions, broken relationships, regret afterward. All these are the results of a single moment of lost control. Goleman gives real-life examples. A manager fired an employee in a moment of anger, then regretted it. A mother screamed harshly at her child, then cried as she comforted him. A young man destroyed a romantic relationship because he didn't know how to handle his jealousy. Strength lies in calmness. The strongest people are not those who don't feel, but those who feel deeply and still choose calmly. Self-regulation is the art of being the leader of your emotion, not its follower. The message of this chapter: those who can't control themselves will not be able to manage anything in their lives. Emotional intelligence is not measured by how strong your feelings are, but by your ability to live them without being enslaved by them.
Chapter 7. Motivation. How to drive yourself from within. Where does the power that moves you come from? In this chapter, Goleman focuses on the power of internal motivation, that energy that pushes us to achieve, to succeed, to persevere in hard times. And he tells us that one of the pillars of emotional intelligence is the ability to ignite and sustain self-motivation, even in the absence of external rewards. This is not just a fleeting excitement, but an inner system of persistence and resilience. Emotional intelligence as fuel for achievement. Goleman explains that emotionally intelligent individuals don't wait for encouragement to come from the outside. Have a clear goal and are ready to work for it. Know how to deal with failure as a learning opportunity, not a reason to quit. Possess something rare, self-discipline combined with enthusiasm. And here lies the difference between someone who merely wants success and someone who actually moves toward it even when recognition is delayed. What drives us from within? There are 3 key internal motivators. Enjoyment of the task itself, loving what you do, not just what it gets you.
Desire for excellence, not out of envy, but to prove yourself and fulfill your potential. Commitment to personal values, like someone who works because they believe in a mission or want to make a difference. These internal forces are what give a person the power to persist through fatigue and to succeed despite failure. Famous experiment, the marshmallow test. Goleman reviews a famous psychological experiment. Children were placed in front of a marshmallow and told that if they waited without eating it, they would receive 2 instead of 1. Who was able to wait? The children who had the ability to delay gratification and relied on internal motivation. The surprising result: years later, those same children outperformed others academically and socially. The message is, whoever can delay immediate gratification holds the key to future success. Self-motivation in daily life. The student who reviews his lessons even though he dislikes exams. The athlete who trains every day even without an upcoming competition. The writer who writes in total isolation without any guarantee of being published. The entrepreneur who keeps going despite rejections and losses. These people are not moved by applause, but by an inner flame that doesn't die. How to strengthen your self-motivation. Define a clear and meaningful goal. Connect your daily actions to your bigger purpose. Track your progress regularly. Forgive yourself when you slip and return to the path. Celebrate small victories to nourish your spirit. Chapter message. Self-motivation is the art of lighting your own fire, even when all the lights around you go out. If you have this, you don't need someone to push you because you fly with the power of your own wings.
Chapter 8. Empathy. Reading the emotions of others. Do you hear what isn't said? In this chapter, Daniel Goleman takes us to another dimension of emotional intelligence, one that's no longer just about you, but about others. To understand yourself is one thing, but to understand others is something else entirely. And this is where empathy comes in. The ability to read and understand others' emotions even when they're not spoken. How does empathy work in the brain? The human brain has what are called mirror neurons. These are the reason why you flinch when you see someone in pain. You smile when someone else is happy. You feel sadness when you see tears, even if you don't know the story. Goleman says empathy begins with this instinctive ability to feel what others feel. But this instinct needs training to become a conscious and powerful skill. What's the difference between real empathy and false empathy? True empathy means listening, not interrupting, trying to feel with the person, not rushing to give advice, being emotionally present, not projecting your own stories onto them. False empathy, on the other hand, only shows concern to seem nice, minimizes the other person's feelings while thinking it's helpful. Like, come on, others have it worse. How do we read others' emotions? Goleman points out that most emotional communication is nonverbal. Tone of voice, facial expressions, body language, eye contact, all are small cues, but they say so much. Those with emotional intelligence pick up on these signs easily. They can read what is not said. Why is empathy important in life? It's the foundation of healthy human relationships. It helps you understand even those who are different from you. It makes you a better leader, a better partner, a more conscious human being. Empathy doesn't mean always agreeing. It means you first understand the other person, then choose how to respond. How can you develop empathy? Listen more than you speak. Don't interrupt. Don't judge.
Ask, how do you feel, instead of, why did you do that? Put yourself in their shoes before reacting. Watch for nonverbal signals. Goleman sums it up. Be truly present. Presence itself is empathy. Chapter message. Empathy is the bridge through which you cross from your world into someone else's. And without that bridge, we remain strangers, even to those closest to us.
Chapter 9. The Art of Relationship Management. Managing Emotions in Others. Do you know how to handle the invisible threads of relationships? In this chapter, Daniel Goleman continues building emotional intelligence from the inside out. After we learned how to understand ourselves and manage our own emotions, then how to read others' feelings, empathy, we now reach the peak of the skill: to interact intelligently with others' emotions and manage them well, not to manipulate, but to create more conscious, harmonious, and humane relationships. Every relationship is an emotional network. Every human interaction is an emotional exchange. A glance, a word, a gesture, silence. Everything sends a message and creates an emotional climate between you and the other. Emotional intelligence here is not measured by what you say only, but by what you stir in the other person. Who controls whom in relationships? In any relationship, either you're adjusting the emotional atmosphere, or you're swept away in it unconsciously, or you're igniting tension without realizing it. Goleman warns, those who don't control their emotions in relationships often become victims of others' emotions. Examples of managing others' emotions. A nurse calms an anxious patient with a few kind words. A leader motivates a team during a moment of doubt. A mother absorbs her child's anger and turns it into dialogue. A friend saves a tense relationship with a moment of empathy and honesty. These people don't just react, they create the right emotional climate. Emotional conflicts. How do they start? How do you resolve them? Conflicts often don't start because of the visible issue, but because of how emotions were handled during the issue. A mocking look, a sarcastic tone, ignoring someone's feelings, a hasty reaction. But the emotionally intelligent person calms, doesn't inflame, contains, doesn't attack, waits for the storm to pass, then speaks. Skills for emotionally intelligent relationships. Handling disagreements with kindness and clarity. Speaking the truth without hurting others. Using humor to ease tension. Providing emotional support when needed. Active listening, making others feel truly heard and understood. Goleman emphasizes these skills can be learned. They are not just inborn talents. At work, at home, everywhere. Professional success doesn't rely only on IQ, but on the ability to handle coworkers, earn clients' trust, solve human problems, not just technical ones. In personal relationships, emotional intelligence means keeping love alive, turning conflict into understanding, building a bond no storm can break. Chapter message: managing emotions in relationships is not control, but harmony. To become a source of balance and awareness in every circle you enter, instead of the source of chaos or impulsiveness.
Part 3. Emotional Intelligence in Everyday Life. Chapter 10. The Family Roots of Emotional Intelligence. Where does it all begin? In this profound chapter, Daniel Goleman takes us back to the beginning, to home, to childhood, to the years in which the first emotional responses are formed. Quote, "The home is the first school for emotional learning, and the parents are the first teachers, whether they know it or not." End quote. A child does not learn emotions from books, but from how they feel inside their home. What does a child learn without being told? Is the child allowed to express their feelings? Are they listened to or ignored? Do they see their parents managing emotions with maturity? How does the home handle conflict, anger, and sadness? Does the home foster feelings of safety and acceptance? All these questions form the foundation of a child's emotional intelligence. The child as an emotional sponge. The child watches, senses, and imitates. So if they see a father who knows only how to yell, or a mother who hides her sadness by suppression, or a home that ignores emotions, they will form a confused understanding of emotions, either fearing them, suppressing them, or exploding them impulsively and unconsciously. The parent relationship equals the first emotional model. The relationship between the parents forms the first lesson a child sees in how to disagree without destroying each other, how to express emotions respectfully, how to comfort one another when falling apart, how to forgive and repair the relationship. And when the child sees a relationship full of tension, neglect, or violence, they often repeat those patterns in the future unconsciously. Scientific research supports this. Goleman points to long-term studies confirming children who grew up in emotionally safe environments became more capable of expressing themselves, soothing their emotions, forming successful relationships, dealing with failure, while those raised in homes that ignored or suppressed emotions were more prone to anxiety, withdrawal, or aggression. Can things be fixed if the chance was missed in childhood? Yes. Goleman affirms that emotional intelligence is not only innate, but can be learned at any age. But recognizing the emotional foundation we were raised on is the first step to understanding why we feel and react the way we do today. How do we reparent ourselves emotionally? Be aware of inherited emotional patterns. Don't repeat your parents' ways if they hurt you. Learn to truly listen. Allow yourself to express without fear. Don't raise your children based on what you lacked, but on what they truly need. Message of the chapter. Emotional intelligence is planted in the home, watered with love, and bears fruit in every relationship that follows. And no matter what your roots are, you can always plant new seeds for yourself and for those you love.
Chapter 11. Mind and Emotion in the Classroom. Is the place of learning free from emotion? In this chapter, Daniel Goleman poses a central question. Do we learn with the mind alone, or is emotion involved in every moment of learning? The answer he provides, supported by research and real-world examples, is that emotion plays a central role in the learning process. In fact, what a student feels in the classroom may determine more than their intelligence or cognitive ability. Learning doesn't happen in a mental vacuum. The brain does not function efficiently when the body is tense or the soul is anxious. Specifically, the amygdala, a part of the brain, monitors threats and anxiety, and when activated, it triggers alarms that disrupt the higher thinking centers of the brain. That's why a student who feels fear from their teacher, or anxiety due to classmates, or shame about making mistakes in front of others, will not be able to concentrate fully, even if they're smart or hardworking. The school is an emotional environment before an academic one. The classroom is not just desks and blackboards. It is an emotional space where a student lives every day. Does the student feel safe? Does anyone understand them? Are they allowed to make mistakes and learn from them? Are their efforts rewarded or only their results? The answers to these questions largely determine their readiness to learn and grow. Emotional intelligence in schools, a necessity, not a luxury. Goleman recounts experiments in schools that introduced programs for teaching emotional and social skills. How does the student express their emotions? How do they control their impulses? How do they listen to others? How do they resolve conflict? How do they empathize with a classmate? And the results were striking. A drop in aggressive behavior, improvement in academic performance, healthier relationships between students and teachers, a calmer, more cooperative school environment. A case study, the child who couldn't sit still. Goleman shares the story of a first-grade child who couldn't sit still or focus. It was initially believed he had ADHD, but observing his home environment revealed that he was living in constant tension and verbal abuse. The problem wasn't in his brain, it was in his emotional world. How can we create an emotionally intelligent learning environment? Train teachers in emotional intelligence. Teach students skills like self-awareness, regulation, and empathy. Create a classroom climate where the student feels safe, understood, and accepted. Treat mistakes as learning opportunities, not punishable offenses. Recognize that emotions are just as important as information. Message of the chapter: no mind works well when drowning in fear or anxiety. Emotional intelligence in schools is not an optional educational philosophy. It is the foundation of any real learning.
Chapter 12. Trauma and Negative Emotions. When emotions leave invisible scars. In this chapter, Daniel Goleman dives deep into the dark side of emotion. Trauma, pain, emotional wounds that don't bleed but drain us from within. The message is clear and painful. Negative emotional experiences, especially in childhood, shape us more deeply than we imagine. And if not addressed, they can turn into silent bombs that obstruct a person's emotional and cognitive growth for decades. Psychological trauma, not always big, but always deep. Not all traumas are wars or catastrophes. Sometimes it's simply constant yelling from parents, emotional neglect, repeated belittling at school, a violent scene the child couldn't understand. These small experiences create a hidden emotional void, which prevents the child from developing emotional stability or self-confidence. How does trauma affect the brain? Goleman explains, when exposed to trauma, the amygdala reacts intensely to danger and remains in a state of constant alertness even after the danger has passed. This means the person becomes hypersensitive to any threat and may overreact with fear or anger to simple situations because their brain has learned to stay in survival mode. The effects of long-term negative emotions. Erosion of self-confidence, disturbed relationships, difficulty concentrating and learning, health problems due to chronic stress, loss of inner peace. If negative emotions are left untreated, they don't disappear, they transform into anger, depression, avoidance, or addiction. Is healing possible? Yes, but it starts with acknowledging the painful emotions, not denying them. Goleman emphasizes the importance of listening to the child who suffers, creating a safe space for emotional expression, teaching children and adults emotional awareness instead of suppression,
providing early psychological support before wounds grow deeper. The child who's hurt and not healed may grow into an adult who hurts himself or others. Here, Goleman warns of the consequences of ignoring emotional intelligence. A child constantly shamed or mocked may become an angry teenager, or an adult unable to communicate, or a parent repeating the same cruelty unconsciously. Emotional education as prevention. When we teach children to name their feelings, to express them, to manage anger or fear, we are not shielding them from life's pain, but giving them the tools to face it, understand it, and heal from it. Message of the chapter: trauma isn't what happened to you, but what happened inside you as a result. And emotional intelligence is the key to understanding that inner world and setting it free. Chapter 13. The Moral Mind. Is emotional intelligence connected to morality? In this chapter, Daniel Goleman poses a crucial question. Can emotional intelligence shape a person's moral compass? The answer he provides is yes, and powerfully so, because morality isn't just a mental decision, it's also an emotional one, rooted in empathy, conscience, and a sense of responsibility. Morality is not planted in the mind alone, but also in the heart. A child doesn't become moral because they know right from wrong, but because they feel the impact of their actions on others. And this feeling doesn't come from logical intelligence, but from emotional intelligence, from empathy, compassion, and self-discipline. Emotion and morality in the brain. Goleman explains that areas in the brain are responsible for responding to moral wrongdoing, feeling guilt or shame, restraining harmful impulses. All of these function through the emotional regulation system. Someone who can't manage their anger, lust, or selfishness may know values, but won't act according to them. When the mind is disconnected from emotion. A chilling example Goleman presents: people who commit crimes without remorse. Often they know what they did is wrong, but feel no inner guilt because they lack an emotional conscience. Here, Goleman distinguishes between cognitive intelligence, knows the rule, and emotional intelligence, feels the weight of the rule and internalizes it. How do we raise a moral mind? By example. Children learn from what they see, not just what they're told. Through empathy. When they feel another's pain, they understand why not to cause it. Through dialogue, not just punishment, but explaining feelings and consequences. By encouraging moral reflection. What would you do? Why? How does the other person feel? By building an internal conscience, motivated by ethics, not just fear of punishment. Morality doesn't come from lectures, but from daily experiences. When you teach a child to wait their turn, to consider others' feelings, to apologize when they're wrong, to think about the consequences of their actions, you're not giving them a moral lesson. You're wiring their moral neural network. Morality in an age of emotional detachment. Goleman warns that violence in the media, selfishness in materialistic culture, weak family bonds, all threaten to produce a generation that knows values but doesn't feel them. And this is where emotional intelligence becomes an inner shield against moral collapse. Chapter summary. Moral intelligence is not just owning values, but deeply feeling the obligation to live by them. And the moral mind cannot flourish without an emotional soil rich in empathy, discipline, and self-awareness. Part 4. Applications of Emotional Intelligence. Chapter 14. Emotional Intelligence in the Workplace. Is success at work a matter of intellect or emotion? In this chapter, Daniel Goleman asserts that the modern workplace no longer rewards only those with technical or cognitive skills, but increasingly rewards those who excel at dealing with people, understanding themselves, and managing their emotions. Emotional intelligence is what distinguishes a good employee from a great leader. Why do some smart people sometimes fail? Goleman asks a rhetorical question. Why do some individuals fail despite their academic excellence? The answer is because they often lack self-awareness, stress regulation, communication skills, empathy, emotional control, and the ability to collaborate and work within a team. These are the core skills represented by emotional intelligence, EQ. What emotional skills are needed in the workplace? Goleman identifies a set of abilities that make the difference. Self-awareness, understanding your emotions and how they affect your actions, acknowledging your strengths and weaknesses. Self-regulation, managing anger and frustration in critical situations, acting rationally rather than impulsively. Self-motivation, possessing an internal drive to succeed, persisting despite failure or criticism. Empathy, understanding others' feelings and needs, interacting kindly without making assumptions. Social skills, building relationships, persuading others, managing conflicts, collaborating with an open spirit. Emotional intelligence equals human capital. Goleman notes that successful companies no longer seek only the smartest, but those with emotional maturity. They evaluate employees based on behavior, cooperation, and stability, not just productivity. They train their teams in EQ skills because it reflects in team performance, customer satisfaction, conflict reduction, and increased organizational loyalty. Study. Why do some rise faster than others? Studies Goleman cites show that 90% of the difference in performance between outstanding and average leaders is due to emotional skills. The most successful manager isn't necessarily the smartest, but the one who understands people, inspires them, and manages them with emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence builds trust, and trust creates a productive environment. A successful workplace isn't free from tension, but full of trust, clarity, and respect. Emotional intelligence makes meetings more effective, feedback more constructive, conflict less destructive, and more educational. Emotional leadership. The successful leader is one who inspires rather than intimidates, corrects without discouraging, maintains team cohesion in times of crisis, and knows when to listen, not just when to speak. Chapter summary. In the marketplace, emotional intelligence is not a luxury, but an essential tool for success, survival, and advancement.
Chapter 15. Managing Emotions in Daily Life. Do we control our emotions, or do they control us? In this chapter, Daniel Goleman focuses on the practical application of emotional intelligence in the details of daily life. He says that emotions are not just internal states we go through, but forces that guide our behavior,
decisions, relationships, and even our health. Those who do not manage their emotions consciously will find themselves regretting things said in a moment of anger, failing in relationships due to impulsive reactions, suffering from chronic stress that affects both body and mind. Why is emotional management a crucial matter? Goleman affirms that the ability to manage emotions is not suppression, but intelligent regulation. We don't suppress anger, fear, or sadness because we're ashamed of them, but we don't want them to sabotage our lives. Emotional intelligence doesn't mean not feeling. It means knowing when to express, how, and with whom. How does emotion regulation work in the brain? When an emotional event occurs, example, harsh criticism, the amygdala is immediately activated, pushing you to react. But the prefrontal cortex steps in, if emotional training is present, slowing the response and restoring balance. This is the essence of emotional intelligence, interrupting automaticity and choosing consciously. Tools for daily emotion management. Mindfulness. Noticing your emotions and thoughts the moment they arise, without getting swept away by them. Breathing and calm. Deep breathing techniques calm the nervous system, restoring control during moments of emotional escalation. Reframing. Changing how you see the situation. Instead of saying, "He insulted me," say, "He seems hurt and is expressing it poorly." Healthy expression. Don't suppress, but express in a civilized manner. I felt frustrated when that happened. Avoid blame and attacks. What about anger, fear, and sadness? Goleman does not downplay these emotions. He sees them as internal signals that alert us to what we need. But if unmanaged, they turn into harmful behaviors. Anger can fuel justice. Fear can teach caution. Sadness can help reset priorities, but only if handled with intelligence, not reactivity. Emotions and relationships. In our daily relationships, poor emotional management is one of the biggest causes of divorce, constant arguments, lost friendships, communication failure in work or family. Goleman says, words spoken in a moment of reactivity can destroy years of relationship. Emotional pressure on the body. Constant emotional stress wears down the nervous system, the immune system, the heart, memory. Those who don't express or regulate their emotions suffer more from anxiety, depression, insomnia, chronic illness. Training is possible. The good news is, emotional intelligence is not just an innate talent. It is a skill that can be learned and developed through training, just like muscles. Chapter summary. Your emotions are not your enemy, but signals that need understanding and leadership, not denial or escape. Managing emotions intelligently is what makes the difference between a life full of chaos and a life full of balance.
Chapter 16. Emotional Intelligence and Health. Emotional Intelligence and Health. Do your emotions affect your body? Goleman answers clearly, yes and profoundly. The body and the mind are not two separate entities, but intertwined like nerves to the heart. Emotions are not merely psychological states. They trigger real physiological reactions. Anger raises blood pressure. Sadness weakens the immune system. Anxiety disrupts breathing and digestion. Chronic stress accelerates aging. Psychological stress kills slowly. Goleman points out that chronic emotional stress is a hidden factor in heart disease, a powerful trigger for strokes, a cause of elevated cortisol, the stress hormone,
one of the causes of immune system weakness. Sometimes a person doesn't die from the illness itself, but from the stress caused by the illness, relationships, work, or loneliness. Chronic anger, a silent poison. Momentary anger is natural, but when it becomes a lifestyle, it turns toxic. Goleman mentions that people who constantly suppress their anger or constantly explode in anger are more likely to suffer from heart disease, ulcers, and blood pressure problems. Those who manage their anger intelligently, express it calmly, analyze its causes, and channel it into constructive solutions are the least physically harmed. Sadness, depression, and their physical effects. Goleman presents evidence that deep sadness slows post-surgical healing. Depression weakens immunity, increases the risk of death after health crises. But emotional intelligence provides protection because it teaches how to deal with loss, how to seek support instead of isolation, how to reinterpret traumatic events. Emotional intelligence as preventive medicine. Having emotional intelligence doesn't prevent illness, but it lessens its impact, accelerates recovery, and strengthens psychological immunity. For example, someone who understands that their anxiety is just a signal, not the end of the world, takes action, walks, meditates, talks, breathes, confronts, instead of choking internally and relying on pills and stimulants. Medicine and prevention start from within. Goleman doesn't say replace treatment with a smile, but says manage your emotions wisely and you'll be less likely to suffer mental and physical breakdowns. Emotional intelligence does not replace medication, but complements it and prevents many of its causes. Chapter Summary. Emotional intelligence is not just the key to relationships, but a safety valve for your health. Managing emotions also means living longer, getting sick less, and recovering faster.
Part 5. A Window into the Future. Chapter 17. Toward an Emotionally Intelligent Society. Toward an emotionally intelligent society. Can an entire society become more emotionally mature? In this closing chapter, Daniel Goleman widens the lens of vision, taking us from the individual to society as a whole. Quote, "If we want a future that is safer, more just, and balanced, we must begin inside the human being, with the heart and emotions, not just the mind and behavior." Unquote. Goleman does not view emotional intelligence as merely a personal skill, but as a social project, from individual skill to collective culture. The author asserts that building an emotionally mature society is not achieved through laws alone or a balanced economy alone, but through parenting rooted in empathy, education that fosters self-awareness and emotional regulation, media that promotes compassion, not violence, work environments that reward kindness and understanding, not harshness and conflict. The role of schools, building a more aware generation. Goleman says, quote, "What the child does not learn at home, they must find in school." Unquote. Therefore, he calls for schools to integrate what is called social and emotional learning into their curricula, which includes self-awareness, emotional expression, emotional regulation, communication skills, conflict management, and empathy for others. These skills are no less important than math and language. They are the foundation upon which all future success is built.
Family, the first lab of emotions. The home is the first emotional classroom in a child's life, and parents are the first teachers in this field. A child who sees their parents expressing emotions consciously and resolving conflicts without violence will naturally learn how to face life with mature emotions. But one who grows up amid shouting or emotional coldness will carry within a chaos that is difficult to tame later. Media and culture, manufacturing collective emotions. Goleman warns against media that fuels collective fear, glorifies violence, mocks vulnerability, distorts feelings like compassion, remorse, and the admission of mistakes. He calls for media that promotes mature human role models, characters who are not ashamed of their emotions, but inspire us with how they manage them. Toward an emotional citizenship. Goleman proposes that emotional intelligence should become a core component of citizenship. To know yourself is to participate in society consciously. To understand others is to build bridges, not walls. To manage your emotions is to spare your nation from violence and fragmentation. Peace begins within. Every war in the world began first with conflicts inside the human soul. Jealousy, pride, revenge, fear, contempt for others. And every peace project must begin by rebuilding the individual from within. Is this just a dream? Goleman acknowledges that building a more emotionally intelligent society is not easy, but it is possible through accumulation, education, and collective awareness. Quote, just as we succeeded in spreading education, sanitation, and vaccines, we can also universalize emotional intelligence as a human right. Unquote. Chapter summary. Quote, the future of humanity is not determined by technology alone, but by the emotional maturity of those who use it. Unquote. If we want a better world, let's begin with the children, with our homes, with ourselves.
Every great mind starts with a single page, and you've just turned one. If this chapter's moved you, imagine what's coming next. Subscribe, hit the bell, and unlock the next idea. Keep listening. Keep growing.